Welcome, Unit 1 lesson regarding the battles of the Civil War. So today we're going to do the objective, first of all, is to analyze the battles of the Civil War, the events of the Civil War, the course of the Civil War, really. And this is a super quick rundown of it, because this course is U.S. history, not Civil War history. Really, we could teach an entire semester at least on just the Civil War alone. But today, what you're going to get is the uh, sped up, very quick, you know, details of the course of the Civil War. So your preview question today, on the left side here, you see a political cartoon. It says Scott's Great Snake. You're going to draw this general region of the United States. You don't have to draw every single state like you did before, but you do have to get the general outline of the U.S., and then you're going to draw a snake around it. And then I want you to answer the following two questions. One, how does an anaconda kill its prey? And number two, the Union strategy for winning the war is called the Anaconda Plan. Predict how the Union will try to defeat the Confederacy using, both this image here, and then also this map is a great reference point for things as well. So I want you to think about how anacondas kill their prey and how the Union is going to try and defeat the Confederacy using this quote unquote anaconda plan. Moving on to our notes, I'm going to tell you what the anaconda plan is. So you were supposed to think about it first and kind of figure it out. Now I'm going to tell you. So the anaconda plan is to squeeze the South into submission. So when we think about what an anaconda does, they're a constrictor. They don't eat their prey alive. They strangle it first, and then they eat their prey. We live in Florida. This is not an uncommon occurrence. Not anacondas, but Burmese pythons are a big problem in Florida right now because they're an invasive species. Because people are like, oh, I want a little cute pet snake. And then little Snaky Poo gets really big, and people are like, well, I'm going to let it out to the wild. And Mr. Snaky Poo meets Mrs. Snaky Poo, and they make lots of little Snaky Poos. And the unfortunate effect of that has been that the Florida ecosystem has been really disturbed, especially down in the Everglades of South Florida. You can even Google it, an image of an alligator that fought a python, and it was it's what you call a nobody won. It's a draw because the python successfully strangled the alligator and swallowed the alligator, but the alligator was so large it caused the python to explode. So they both are dead. But you can look up that, and that's and to give you an idea of how severe the problem is of Burmese pythons in South Florida. Uh, they kill gators, they kill Florida deer, they kill basically the studies of every animal. We've seen dramatic decreases in the population because of the Burmese python, because one, they have no natural predator, and even when we humans try to organize these hunts to take them down, we can't find them. They're hard to find. They're good hiders. They are animals that know how to survive. So this is a big problem in the South Florida ecosystem. Us here in Tampa, we don't have to deal with it as much. Luckily, we get, if we're lucky, we might get like on average 2 or 3 freezes a year, and that kind of keeps them from getting that far up here. However, it could still happen. They could still push their way up here, and we might see sightings of them, but they're mostly common down here in South Florida near the Everglades. Anyways, that's a temporary biology lesson by me. Let's get back to the history aspect of it. The Union is going to squeeze the South into submission by blocking off their ports and by blocking off their access to trade, because remember, the only thing they have going for them is cotton and donkeys, and mostly the cotton, and they can't sell to anybody. They can't sell to the textile factories in the north. They can't sell to the British. They can't sell to the French, because we are going to use our Navy to blockade the entire coast, to blockade the Mississippi River, and we're going to isolate the South. And with a shortage of factories and a shortage of food producing capabilities and no way to generate economic activity, eventually they are going to run out of resources to continue to fight this war. And so this is why in previous lessons I say that there is really no chance that the South ever could have won this war at all, because of that and that alone. And the Northern and Lincoln's determination to preserve the Union, it just wasn't going to happen. But the war is going to go on for 4 very, very long, bloody years because of the Southern determination. So we do have to give them credit for that. They were very gung ho about wanting to own slaves. Anyways, the Confederate strategy is a little bit different. It's to hold on to their territory and to simply be recognized as an independent nation. And so initially, they're not going to make efforts to invade Union territory, but later on they will. The first official battle of the Civil War. So we already talked about in South Carolina, the conflict that happened there that kind of started the Civil War at Fort Sumner. However, the Battle of Bull Run in Virginia is like the first time troops actually meet up for a battle. So Bull Run in Manassas, Virginia, at the time it was ruled. Today it's a thriving, very expensive actually suburb of Washington, D.C. Troops meet up there, and people, because they don't realize how brutal war is, and we still, even today, with all the access we have to world media, don't realize how brutal war can be. But back then, people showed up thinking it would be nice to watch the soldiers fight, and they came with blankets and food to have a little picnic and watch the soldiers fight. And what they witnessed horrified them and ended up being this precursor to how long and bloody this war would be. The Union lost that war. The troops retreated back to D.C., and their General Stonewall Jackson got the nickname of being Stonewall Jackson, or, he was basically a stone wall. The Confederates had an opportunity here to invade D.C. from this point. They chose not to because, once again, the main focus here was the preservation of territory. Following this, the Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee is important because up until that point is one of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War. Why was it so bloody? Because General Ulysses S. Grant refused to retreat. 25,000 were either killed or injured. This is also Grant, a future president. He becomes famous as a Civil War general. But it's also important to understand that as much credit as the generals of the Civil War get for being these military geniuses, they weren't. They were really more just about sending in man after man after man to be shredded in war. Because what you have with the Civil War is this new technology, like a very primitive version of the Gatling gun, meets traditional warfare. And so you're just marching off troops to die into gunfire, and it's very ugly and very bloody. We do have pictures from the Civil War, mostly of dead soldiers, because the photography back then couldn't take pictures of moving objects because it actually took several minutes for the film to actually absorb the image, which is why back in the day when people took portraits, they don't look particularly happy because it's easier to hold a frown than it is to hold a smile without getting a little bit frustrated or moving your head around and stuff. So they had to stand still for their photos, and dead people typically don't move unless, they don't move. So you don't have to worry about that. All right, moving on. Battles of the Civil War continued. The Battle of Antietam. General Lee was looking for a victory on Union soil and was hoping to start an uprising in the border state of Maryland. So we've learned so far that border states were Union states touching Confederate states, and in most cases they had legalized slavery, but they had chosen to stay as members of the Union. And what Lee was hoping to accomplish here, and this is a shift in the Confederate strategy, because at first they just wanted to hold on to their territory and be recognized. Now they're hoping that if they can take away Union territory, maybe people in the Union will say, well, you know what? Now they're a threat to our own territory. We should just recognize them as a country and move on from this and kind of just acknowledge them as being their own nation. That was kind of like, it's almost a propaganda war in many ways. So Lee's thinking Maryland, culturally very similar to the southern states. They own slaves, that the people there would be sympathetic to the South, and that he could invade and start an uprising in Maryland in which they would come join the Confederacy and Maryland would secede. They were wrong, and it ended up becoming a very bloody battle in which 23,000 people were dead or injured by the end of it. Lincoln's going to play back the propaganda game against General Lee by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves in rebelling states. So a lot of people misunderstand what the Emancipation Proclamation means. They think that it freed all slaves, and it simply did not. It only freed slaves in the South, and that was it. Now, you might be asking, doesn't Lincoln not have authority down there? Yeah, technically he doesn't. And as a matter of fact, this was more about one, incentivizing them to come back into the union. He actually offers a deadline to these southern states in which if they join the union at a certain point, they can keep their slaves. So he's actually trying to play the propaganda war back and bring Confederate states back into the union, which none of them really did. And a lot of the leaders of slave rebellions in the South, they kind of take offense to this idea that Lincoln freed the slaves in the South, because in reality, they felt like they were freeing themselves with this, and that it wasn't Lincoln who freed them. So that's also important to understand. So what the Emancipation Proclamation was about was not so much freeing slaves, but it was about bringing Southern states back in and breaking up the Confederacy. Not that it's not an important document, because it is, but he's not going to start freeing slaves in the border states yet, especially Maryland, especially Kentucky, especially Missouri. He's not going to do that because those states have remained loyal to the Union. If he frees their slaves, they might suddenly decide to secede as well. So he's not going to do that. It wouldn't be smart at that exact moment. Continuing on, the Battle of Gettysburg became the bloodiest battle over several days in the Civil War. It's a 3-day battle in which 50,000 are either dead or wounded by the end of it. This was also the last-ditch effort by the Confederacy to invade a Union territory. This was like their last hope of that idea of if they can get Union territory, people in the North be like, you know what, let's just acknowledge them as being country so we don't lose any more territory. It was a 3-day battle. The Union won. 50,000 were dead or wounded. Lincoln came here and gave his famous Gettysburg Address, which is notably one of the more powerful presidential speeches in American history, which I'll show you here. Typically in class, I would play you a video of it being read out loud. You can take the time to read it, but it's got the famous introduction. 70 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And going onward, he basically talks about how this war is important because it's about preserving American democracy. It's about preserving this experiment that we've started of people creating their own government, and that government being of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so that's what his speech is going to focus on. And it's a very powerful speech, which you need, if you haven't looked up the YouTube video for the recreation of him reading it, you need to at least read it and gain a better understanding of what Lincoln is trying to say in it. All right, wrapping this all up, your response question today, and I already talked about this, so you can kind of use the information I've already told you to help you answer these questions, but you're literally looking, I'm going to move myself over here for a second. You're going to look at this and this quote of the Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln says that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state, ... in rebellion against the United States shall be thenceforward and forever free. So you need to answer the following questions. In which states have slaves been freed? In which states have slaves not been freed? Why do you think Lincoln only freed some slaves? And why does Lincoln offer a deadline? I already told you these things, but you need to analyze this quote and think about it and answer it on your own. So I'm really testing to see if you were paying attention or not. So try and answer this first by only analyzing the paragraph and by answering the questions. And if you're really not sure, check back on the video. And if you're really not sure, then come talk to me about it in class. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to the lecture regarding the battles of the Civil War.